Once again, thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Biology of Your Diet. I'm Greg Berry, Director in the Office of Alumni Affairs. Please note, since we're virtual, excuse technical issues or glitches that may pop up. Additionally, we are recording today's webinar and we'll upload it to our website this afternoon or tomorrow. Today's presentation is the second of a four-part series on nutrition, your diet, and you. Let's face it, mornings can be rough for us. Really rough. Maybe you get your morning boost from a cup of coffee, Cocoa Puffs, or even bacon. Today, we'll explore the biology of our diet with Dr. Suzanne Judd. Dr. Judd is the director of the Lister Hill Center for Health Policy and a professor in the UAB School of Public Health. She joined the UAB family in 2008 as an associate professor after spending some time as an engineer at Kimberly-Clark. She earned her Master of Public Health and PhD in Biological and Biomedical Sciences from Emory University. So at this time, I would like to welcome Dr. Judd back to the webinar series once again. The platform is yours, and thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be back here again and great to be talking to you all about a topic that I'm sure many of you are very interested in. It's one of the things that people ask me most often is to talk about diet from more of a scientific perspective, because that's what often people are reading about in the news. So before we get started, I just want to talk about some basic concepts that you're going to hear a lot about today, specifically nutrients. And what are nutrients? Nutrients are substances found in food. And those nutrients can be either macronutrients, which are what many of you hear about when you look at a nutrition label and you're looking at how much protein or carbohydrates, sugar, people sometimes say for carbohydrates, or fat is in food. There's actually one other macronutrient, that is in our diet, and that's alcohol. People don't think about that, but alcohol does contribute energy to your body. I have the relative energy amounts for each of these. Protein and carbohydrates both contribute about 4 calories per gram. Fat has the most at 9 calories per gram, and alcohol comes in pretty high too at 7 calories per gram. Micronutrients, on the other hand, if we're thinking, like a car engine, it would be the additives in gasoline. The macronutrients would be the gasoline that create the energy. And the micronutrients are the additives that don't do anything to give the car energy, but they help the gasoline or the car itself to work better. Maybe they keep the gas cleaner. They stop buildup from forming on the engine. It's very similar in the human body. Those micronutrients are additives that don't give you energy. So they don't contribute calories, but they do keep your body working optimally. Before we get started, it's important to have a basic definition of what digestion is and what happens when we eat. A lot of people don't think about specifically what all happens in the body, so I wanted to talk about this first. You first ingest something through your mouth, whether you drink it or you eat it, and swallow it down into your stomach. And a lot of people just say stomach. My food went into my stomach and was absorbed by my stomach. But that's actually not quite true. The food goes into your stomach, and that's where it first meets up with acids and some digestive enzymes. And the stomach is able to move around and kind of mechanically squish the food to get it down into your small intestine. There are 3 parts of your small intestine that we're going to talk about later in the talk, but those 3 parts are responsible for absorbing almost all of the nutrients, whether macronutrients or micronutrients that you eat. Those 3 parts of the small intestine are known as the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. Then, after the small intestine, the matter that you ate goes into your large intestine. And it moves through your large intestine to pull out any other water or electrolytes you may have consumed and really condense it down so that you can pass it out of your body through elimination. During this process, there are lots of little steps along the way that help with the digestion of the food. The gallbladder stores enzymes from the pancreas to kind of to help have a bolus of digestive material that can come in when you eat something. The liver is critical for digestion. Actually, when you start to absorb those nutrients from your body, the first place they go is the liver in case something needs to be detoxified before it winds up in the brain. The liver is really that first stop that tries to weed out anything that you've eaten that might not be something that your body can handle. A lot of people don't realize this either, but you have your skin, and your skin is covered with something called epithelial cells. Well, it turns out all of your intestines are as well. They act as a barrier to keep foreign substances out of the body. And the body works really hard to make sure that it absorbs the right thing and doesn't take in anything that's the wrong thing, so that you can stay healthy and functioning. We're going to start with macronutrients because that's one of the things people think about the most. In particular, you hear a lot these days about carbohydrates and proteins. And of course, there are always various diets. For as long as human beings have been interested in maintaining their weight, there have been various diets. And sometimes they're high sugar, sometimes they're high fat, sometimes they're high carbohydrate or high protein. But the one thing that's consistent is there's always somebody willing to give out dietary advice to help with weight loss. Carbohydrates, when you hear about them, they're sugar. They're similar to what we think of when we think of sugar, because they can be turned into simple sugars to give your body energy. The primary energy that your body uses is glucose, and that would be kind of the simplest form of energy. It can go to all cells. It can be readily used, and it's one of the primary sources of fuel. Your body's actually able to store glucose in case there's some acute period of not having food. It stores it as glycogen. It basically takes all the little glucose and puts them together kind of in a honeycomb structure. It can be stored in the muscle because the muscle calls for a lot of glucose throughout the day. But it can also be stored in the liver so that if you need to call for some into your bloodstream, your body can call for it and have glucose available. In addition to sugar, the sugar part of carbohydrates are also fiber. And I know you've all heard about fiber as well. Fiber can come in two forms. One is soluble. That means that it can dissolve in water. And the other is insoluble, meaning that it doesn't dissolve in water. The soluble fibers can be used to help with sugar in the blood, maintaining glucose levels. They help food to digest a little more slowly. The insoluble fiber does the same, but it also has the benefit that it creates bulking in your intestines, which can help to feel fuller and also help to have food pass more easily through the body. The next macronutrient I'm going to talk about is fat. This is one that's often overlooked, but it's becoming more and more important as we learn about brain health. Fat has more calories per gram. So for years, people tried to avoid fat because they thought that would be a good way for weight loss. You cut fat out of your diet, you would ingest less calories. The issue is that fat can help with feelings of full or satiety. They help your body to feel full. Some of the fats do. Fat can also be converted into sugar. So the glucose, like I mentioned, is critical for your body. There are lots of ways your body has for taking things like protein or fat and turning them into sugar to make sure that your body has the glucose that it needs. But fat can uniquely be burned as well through as ketone bodies. And many of you have heard about the keto diet. One of the things that diet does is it converts your primary energy source from glucose or sugar into ketone bodies through ketosis. And for some people, that process helps them to feel more full. There are many different types of fats, and I'm going to kind of take a slow walk through this slide so everybody has a chance to see it. The biggest piece of nutrition that we're starting to learn is the role of fats in maintaining cellular function. We certainly learned in the 90s that trans fats were bad. Trans fats that were found in margarine and some other sources were associated with greater risk of heart disease. And these were fats that were not necessarily naturally occurring. A lot of them in the diet in the 90s and early 2000s were put in the diet. They were fats that were hydrogenated and converted into these trans fats because they were shelf stable. And it helped with food manufacturers to be able to produce food that was more shelf stable, so therefore more profitable. But it turned out that some of these things were not as good for human arteries. They did lead to much greater risk of heart disease. Now, as we're continuing to understand the role of fat, you hear a lot about things like the Mediterranean diet. One of the proposed ways that the Mediterranean diet is beneficial to your brain and your body is through these polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats. And what you'll notice on the left of the screen is that these polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats, their structure is actually bent. And that bent structure allows them to give more movement to any cell that they're a part of. And most cells have these fats right around their cell membranes. So the cell itself has this layer of fat around the outside. And if you've got saturated fats, you can see where they've got that really strict structure that the cell becomes very rigid and can't move. But the unsaturated fats, because of the bent structures they have, actually make the cell a little bit more fluid. And that turns out to be very helpful for a lot of biological functions. So that's one of the reasons you're starting to hear people again say, well, fat's probably a good idea. You may want to look at sources like avocados, walnuts, olive oil that all have really good sources of polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats. The last macronutrient that are the big three that people think about is protein. Similar caloric profile to carbohydrates with that 4 calories per gram. It's made up of several individual amino acids, and it's really heavily utilized by muscle, both your smooth muscle, which is your arteries and your veins and your heart, but also your skeletal muscle responsible for keeping you upright and moving. The kidney, liver, and intestines, though, also heavily rely on protein. And in times of starvation, the body will prioritize to make sure that these organs have protein. They're the ones that are going to turn over enzymes and be responsible for other bodily processes. So the body really wants these organs to have proteins when they're necessary. And muscle can become a primary reservoir for that protein if you wind up in a time when you're not eating a lot of protein. Protein can be converted to glucose and or ketone bodies, so it can be used for energy in addition to being used as a protein. Primarily, we find protein in meat and legumes in terms of total quantity, but actually you can get quite a bit out of green vegetables and other vegetable sources as well. It's just that you have to eat a lot of them to get enough protein. I have a picture over here of the different types of proteins for those of you that had biochemistry and remember that protein has structure and it can fold in many different ways, all the way up to the 4th degree of folding. And in that 4th degree of folding, the protein can become like a lock and key with various processes in the body, like enzymes, to help everything work the way that it's supposed to. So as we talked about the big 3 macronutrients, the ones that are always going to be on a food label, I wanted to show a food label a little bit here so you have an idea of what we're talking about. On every food label, it's required that fat, carbohydrate, and protein are listed. You now actually have to also have the trans fat amount on there because we know that trans fats aren't good for people. Cholesterol, sodium, those are separate from what we're talking about right now. Then you've got the total carbohydrate intake, and you can see that the label will break this down by fiber and by sugar, including how many added sugars are in the diet. And then lastly, protein. The nutrition labels don't break down protein, so you know specific amino acids. It just tells you the total protein content. There's also on the nutrition label the amount of calories per serving and what % daily value is available for each one of these macronutrients and micronutrients. I did want to bring up alcohol because it actually is a macronutrient. It does have calories, 7 calories per gram. Alcohol is metabolized very differently than the other macronutrients. It's actually converted into acetic acid and then carbon dioxide. The version of alcohol that is intoxicating is this middle version, the aldehyde version. It's the one that circulates in the body, and when it gets to the brain leads to feelings of intoxication. When someone consumes excessive amounts of alcohol, it actually causes changes in the liver for other macronutrient metabolism because the body is trying to shunt all of its efforts into metabolizing the alcohol. It wants to get the toxin out of the body first. So it shifts the way that it digests other nutrients. So another thing that's important to think about with alcohol is that it not only provides energy, but it also changes the way the rest of your body works in terms of metabolizing the macronutrients that you can take in. And unlike the other macronutrients by themselves, alcohol can be very addictive, although sugar can also be a little bit addictive. So now let's switch gears a little bit here. Now we're going to talk about micronutrients, and there are so many micronutrients. I've just highlighted a few for you to think about. They'll all be on the nutrition labels when you read about the various parts of micronutrients that are in the diet. This is the dietary reference intake. I believe it's specifically for men. When you look at the nutrition label, it's based on a 2,000 calorie diet. But if you look at the USDA's tables, it's there are many different dietary reference intakes for various ages of life. The other thing that it's important to know when you think about some of these micronutrients is that they all have an independent function. And theoretically, micronutrients, you have to get them in the diet, although some of these your body can synthesize. The other interesting thing that people often get confused are the B vitamins. People often say, well, I need vitamin D or vitamin B as in boy, but there are actually many B vitamins. And just because they have the letter B does not mean they do the same thing. Each one of these B vitamins, whether it's thiamine, which is B1, or vitamin B12, they have very different roles within the body, and they actually have different syndromes that can happen if you're deficient in any one of these vitamins. The reason they're named the way they are is that back in the day when vitamins were being discovered and named, they were named in order based on the way that they were found in food, A, B, C, D. So the B vitamins all wound up being discovered at roughly the same time, and they wound up being B1, B2, B3, B6, B5, B12. So it's confusing for people because they also have regular names like folate, niacin. But it's important to note that they're not all the same, and you need to make sure that you're getting all of them. There's no such thing as taking one B vitamin. There are many of them. I want to highlight one micronutrient, but didn't want to spend too much time on all of the micronutrients. I'll certainly answer any questions if you have specific questions as we move on in the talk. But vitamin D is an interesting micronutrient. It was found in the later parts of the 1900s. It was found when they took cod liver oil, and they noticed that cod liver oil could prevent a bone disease called rickets in children. And they took the cod liver oil. They knew vitamin A was in cod liver oil already. And so they thought it was the vitamin A at first. But then they destroyed the vitamin A in the cod liver oil and realized that this cod liver oil still prevented rickets. And so they said, okay, it's a new vitamin. It must be vitamin D. Well, it turns out vitamin D was probably a misnomer for it, because this is actually one of those vitamins that is not very prevalent in food. Vitamin D is also called cholecalciferol. It's found in skin primarily. And when the skin is irradiated with sunlight, your body will produce vitamin D. There are some dietary sources of vitamin D, but they are primarily things like liver, because the body can store vitamin D in liver. Milk doesn't even naturally have vitamin D in it. It's the vitamin D is fortified into the milk so that there is some vitamin D, but it doesn't naturally come in milk. Vitamin D is then processed by the liver to turn it into 25-hydroxyvitamin D, which is what you would have measured in your blood. And then it's further processed in various parts of the body, like the kidneys and other tissues. And each and every micronutrient pathway has something similar. It has a similar path, a place where the body works on it, where it converts it to a more active form, and it can be used either in energy metabolism. Some of the vitamins are used in bone metabolism, brain health. So the micronutrients all have various roles within the body. So it's important to get a wide variety of them. This slide shows how complicated absorption is within the gut. And this is where I mentioned we're going to talk a little bit about where absorption occurs. You see, you've swallowed something, it goes into your stomach, and then processes its way through the small intestine, which the bulk of the absorption occurs right there in that small intestine between the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. But you'll notice that different micronutrients are absorbed in different spots of the small intestine. For example, you've got a chunk of the micronutrients absorbed in the duodenum, but then if you look over to the right, you'll see there's an even larger chunk absorbed in the jejunum. So the metabolism of these micronutrients is very complex and highly regulated by the body for the most part. Some of them can be stored in the body, and the body maintains natural storage depots, like iron can be stored for future need, or vitamin D can be stored at times for future need. But others have to be taken in regularly. Vitamin C, for example, there's not a storage depot for vitamin C, so it's important to have a regular dose of vitamin C. One other last thing to mention is that their toxicity can be a factor for some of these micro and macronutrients. And toxicity just means you've taken too much. So there's often an upper limit on the vitamins and minerals. Some of the toxic symptoms are what people would consider mild. For example, heavy doses of magnesium can cause diarrhea or some loose stools. People might say, oh, okay, that's not so bad, but some can have some pretty serious side effects. So it's important to stay within the recommended daily allowance unless you're fighting a deficiency. Some people have to fight deficiencies that their doctors work with them, and then you'll take more therapeutic or higher levels of the individual vitamins. Another form of micronutrients is the antioxidants. Some of the vitamins we've already discussed, like vitamin C and vitamin E, are antioxidants, but there are other antioxidants like the carotenoids, polyphenols, and some of the trace elements. What antioxidants do is they play a role in scavenging up any kind of what we call oxidative compounds within the blood. And these antioxidants, they can go out and it can turn down the heat, so to speak, to keep your body functioning at a high level by absorbing those free radicals and keeping your body functioning optimally. There are other compounds in food, things that have no nutritional value and that your body does not require for health. One of them is caffeine. You hear about that all the time because a lot of us really like our morning dose of coffee. Caffeine is a stimulant. It boosts the heart rate. So you'll notice an acute increase in your heart rate if you monitor your heart rate. It'll raise the body temperature a little bit, increase the metabolism just slightly. But that can also lead to some nausea for people. And some people can't tolerate caffeine at all because of the nausea that happens. Caffeine can also be addictive when taken in large quantities. Or not even large, even just regular daily quantities. Another compound in food, in some foods these days, are the cannabinoids. You're hearing a lot more about cannabinoids in the media: CBD, CBN, THC. Cannabinoids can be used to naturally stimulate the appetite. They can be particularly beneficial when people are struggling to eat, either because of chemotherapy or for some other reason. And they can actually decrease nausea, among many other things that are unstudied, but becoming more and more studied. There are also pathogens in food that people don't think about. Bacteria is a good example of a pathogen that can be good for your body. There are certain bacteria that live in your gut, and it's good to take in high quantities, like from a yogurt or a pill. You can get lots of good bacteria, the acidophilus, in a pill form if you don't like yogurt. But some of the bacteria are bad, like E. coli. You don't want to have an E. coli infection. So the body has ways of trying to filter those out. There are also parasites and viruses that can be found in food. So it's important to make sure that the food is properly cooked so that if there are viruses and parasites, you don't become infected. So we've talked a lot about micronutrients and macronutrients. But I think the real question that folks always have is, so what am I supposed to eat? That's not a straightforward question. That's why you go to the library, there are 2 full rows of books recommending various diets. The reason it's not an easy question is that while the bulk of people think about diet being primarily for weight loss, there are many different reasons that people eat. Some people eat just to make sure their energy is balanced so that they don't feel weak or tired throughout the day. Some people are eating because they're wondering what to eat because they battle with nausea and they want to make sure that they feel okay throughout the day, avoid headaches. Some people are treating cancer. There are social acceptability reasons why people eat, either because they want to be on a particular diet or they want to be able to fit in a restaurant when other people are eating. And then also financial management. Food is not cheap. And that's something that people have to think about is, What types of food can I afford so that I can have an optimally healthy diet? When you think about what types of foods are healthy and balancing macronutrients and micronutrients, there's a physician, Joel Fuhrman, and this scale that he has really is indicative of how you balance your micronutrients. If your only goal were eating tons and tons and tons of micronutrients, then this would be the one you'd look at. You'll notice it's the green vegetables that give you the biggest bang for your buck, where you get lots of micronutrients with very few calories. Then in the middle and the orange are the ones where you get maybe a few extra calories, but still some good micronutrients. And in the red, you're looking at mostly calories without a ton of micronutrients. And I'll sit here for a second so you can take a look at the slide. Not surprising that you see a lot of vegetables as being, lots of micronutrients and very few macronutrients. Eating, though, is about so much more than food. It's really, we don't eat food because we're trying to get a micronutrient or a macronutrient for the most part. We eat food for a variety of reasons, for social reasons, for cultural norms, and people often argue with me, no, it's not cultural norms, but the 6 months that I spent in France, as I talked to French people, one of the things they were always fascinated by is that Americans eat snacks, because that's one thing you won't see is French people snacking. That's just their cultural norm is not to snack. So there are things that we start with at very young ages that kind of get filtered through that we take with us as we eat. People also eat for mental health, for stress, for anxiety, for depression. Sometimes food helps to balance out those things in life that feel like they just have gotten out of control. People eat for illness or illness prevention so that they can feel better in their lives. Some people choose to eat because of various food allergies. And, last, unfortunately, for the most part in this country, but not least, is people eat because they're hungry. So let's talk a little bit about being hungry and what does that mean to be the opposite of hungry, but to actually be full. Again, here's that lovely picture of the gut that we talked about before. There are many ways that we feel full in the body. There are these stretch receptors in the stomach when you start to eat that tell your stomach, I've got enough food, stop eating. The level of blood sugar you have in your body can indicate for you whether or not you're hungry. There are actual hormones in your fat that trigger appetite responses. If your body thinks it's got enough fat, it might send these hormones out and say, you don't need to eat. We've got plenty of energy stored. There are neurotransmitters in the brain, gut peptides and gut hormones, lots of different ways. And you can see I've put just some up here, some that stimulate hunger and some that inhibit hunger. Again, even as you look at these, none of you think about these hormones when you're eating. That's not at all something that people think about. They don't think about, oh, yeah, I'm worried about my insulin levels unless you're managing diabetes or my leptin. My leptin is saying something from my fat cells. People just eat when they're hungry. Another area to think about is metabolism itself. So metabolism, because often what people eat is really tied to managing weight. That's at least in our culture, commonly managing weight is the number one reason people think about changing their diet. And so the metabolism actually becomes an important factor to consider. And what do people mean when they say my metabolism is slow? Well, there are lots of different things for you to consider when you're worried about your metabolism. One of them is thyroid. The thyroid can start to slow down as people age. There are autoimmune diseases that affect the thyroid. And if the thyroid hormone levels go down, the metabolism can slow down. That might feel like, in some people, they might feel colder. They might begin to gain weight, but that's something that your doctor can test for. Another factor are the sex hormones. Testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. As men and women age, these hormone levels can change. In women, they change quite a bit more than they do in men as women start to enter perimenopause and menopause. But those changes in sex hormones can actually change metabolism and how your body calls for energy. The amount of muscle you have, believe it or not, which I think all of you will believe me on this, muscle burns more calories than fat. So the more muscle you have, the more you can eat and still maintain your weight. That's why strength training is a very important part of any weight loss program, because you want to make sure you maintain that skeletal muscle, because it gives you a little extra, little bit of a buffer in terms of the number of calories you need. Exercise is big for metabolism, getting out and getting daily movement to help burn the calories that get taken in. Pregnancy is a factor that happens and changes metabolism in people. And interestingly, there's a hormone produced in pregnancy called HCG. And this hormone is often used by some folks when they're trying to lose weight, because HCG will, in the context of a low calorie diet, will change the way muscle and fat metabolize, which one is called for in terms of producing energy. So more fat will be called for. It's an interesting method to consider. And you may see it out there, but it's definitely something that has not been studied as heavily as you would think, given the number of folks advocating for HCG diets. So the final recommendations here before I want to take questions for you is to learn to read the nutrition labels so you know what types of nutrients are in the foods you eat. Although the general rule of thumb is eat the rainbow, eat lots of different colors. That'll ensure you're getting lots of different micronutrients. And that's what you're really trying to get, as many micronutrients as possible while minimizing those macronutrients if weight loss is your goal. If weight gain is your goal, you also want to increase your macronutrients. Which gets to my second point. Make sure you optimize your diet to meet your goals, not somebody else's, not an author's from a book, but what are your goals for your diet? Make sure that whatever you make changes to, that they meet your goals so that you can be most successful. Eating as many different colored foods as possible will get lots of those micronutrients in your body so your cells and brain can function at the highest possible level. Be sure to have fiber. It's often overlooked, but fiber is so critical for keeping your digestive tract moving and functioning normally. We talked about fats, but think about the fats and make sure the ones you choose have a nutritional benefit, like olive oil, walnuts, avocado. All of those have fats that have really strong nutritional benefits for your body. And lastly, just enjoy your food. Be mindful when you're eating, enjoy the food that you're eating, and try to make little tiny changes so that food doesn't become, something that consumes your thoughts all the time. And with that, I'd like to take some questions from the chat here.
Yeah, and we have a bunch already filtering in. So if anybody has questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We'll mark them as questions and we'll get them relayed over to Dr. Judd. Let's start out with glucose being readily available after consuming carbohydrates. At what point does the body use stored glycogen?
So that's a great question. Your body will use the glycogen that's stored when when the level of glucose in your body starts to go to a certain level, whatever your set point is. The circulating level of glucose will go down. Your body will call for the glycogen from your muscles, from your liver, and that's a very individual process. It depends on your own personal body, what your own personal set points are. But it is good to let your energy levels, your food intake, decrease to a point where your body can call for that glycogen and burn some of it out of your liver and out of your muscles. Again, it's one of the things we don't do much in this country because we really like to snack. And there was a lot of popular diets around eating 6 times a day and not having a long fasted period. But we're really starting to learn more in science about the importance of a lengthy fasted period, time when there is no food taken in, so that your body will get into those glycogen stores.
And I apologize for mispronouncing terminologies. I'm not a doctor by trade, so I will put that out there because I'm going to get into some things that may be difficult without Googling. So what causes a fatty liver diagnosis?
So fatty liver is when your liver itself starts to retain more fat than it should. Your liver will hang on to fat generally because there's an impairment in terms of usually weight loss is one of the first goals, or stopping alcohol, drinking alcohol, to try to get the fat back out of the liver.
In order to prevent kidney stones, this person tries to avoid foods that are high in oxalate. but nutrition labels do not show this information. What would you suggest to know if a food is high or low in oxalates?
Oh, that is so hard. There are a few nutrients. Phosphorus is another one that it's hard to find on a nutrition label, and oxalate's another one. It is really, really hard to identify foods that are high in oxalate because, like you said, the manufacturers don't have to report it, and they can use oxalate to balance out other properties of the food. Processed food is one of the things to avoid because that's one where you just don't know what the manufacturer put in. The foods that are around the outside of the grocery store, the lean protein sources and the fruits and vegetables, you can read about those and you can know exactly how much oxalate's in there. But with the processed foods, it is very hard to know.
How does the thyroid gland affect metabolism?
So the thyroid gland is really the gland that, or the thyroid hormone that really maintains your body temperature. It helps your body with temperature regulation. So as the thyroid hormone levels go lower, your body doesn't do as much heat production, and you produce heat in your fat cells. So it doesn't call on that heat production. Your body temperature will actually decrease. And when your body temperature decreases, even that 0.5 degree, you get a lower metabolism.
In diets, mostly cooking with unprocessed and unfortified food.
Yeah, really the biggest one is B12. For the most part, you can, from a whole food vegan diet, you can get all the micronutrients, and you're probably much higher in micronutrients if you're eating lots of fruits and vegetables and grains and legumes. But B12 can be hard to find in a vegan diet. So that's the most important one to supplement.
What's needed for low white blood cell count?
That one is tough. You'll have to make sure with your doctor that there's not something that's driving the low blood cell count. That'd be the first step. But then generally protein can be helpful with increasing white blood cell count.
Can you share your thoughts on daily intake of generic multivitamin? This person has read some review articles suggesting no benefit compared to well-balanced diets and things like that.
Absolutely. A well-balanced diet, you don't need a micro or a good vitamin. In fact, one of the jokes in nutrition circles is that the only point of vitamins is very expensive urine. That said, I have a teenager, and that teenager does not eat a well-balanced diet, so he takes a multivitamin. I make sure he does. But it's one of those things that is probably not needed if you have a well-balanced diet, but it can be really hard to have a perfectly well-balanced diet. So sometimes you might want to take a multivitamin.
So this person says a number of years ago, a meta-analysis of studies looking at the effects of taking multivitamins seemed to indicate no benefit and perhaps an actual decrease in longevity. It was in a major medical...
I have not seen much research on a decrease in longevity. I'd have to look that one up. But in general, the challenge with multivitamins and the type of research that I do is that we're not going to have a clinical trial to test it. We're going to ask people in observational studies. And in general, people who take multivitamins also work out. They also have lower intakes of alcohol. They tend to have healthier diets. The multivitamin is more like an insurance plan. So it's really tough to figure out, well, okay, is it the role of the exercise or the role of the multivitamin? But no, generally in research, multivitamins are associated with better health outcomes.
What is the best daily vitamin or supplement for women to take?
There are a lot of great multivitamins out there that are specifically for women. It really depends, again, on what you're trying to do. I'll tell you personally, at this point in my life, and this is my personal opinion, I always say, not my scientific opinion, I now take a vitamin that's got green stuff in it too, because I don't do as good of a job as I should at eating cruciferous vegetables and salads. So I don't know if it matters or not, but I do take a multivitamin that includes something from the green vegetable family. Just as I'm aging, it seems to help a little bit with my energy levels. But that's where you can be your own best doctor. Try a couple of different vitamins. If you don't feel anything, don't take it. If it makes you feel better, there's probably no harm.
Are omega fatty acid supplements helpful?
They are, absolutely. The omega-3 fatty acid supplements are really good for heart health, really good for brain health, important for stroke. So absolutely, those omega-3 fatty acids are definitely important, unless you're eating a high fish diet. If you're eating a high fish diet, that'd be another way to get those fats without having to eat a supplement.
Gel caps or pill vitamin absorption, which is the best?
It depends. The pills are fine for the non fatty vitamins, but anything like D, E, the omega-3 fatty acids, the gel is going to be much better.
Which foods might cause inflammation and then conversely help prevent it?
Yeah, so anything you're allergic to will cause inflammation. In the US diet, that tends to be things that might contain gluten or dairy. Those are the two most common food allergens, but a lot of people don't have those allergies. So it's not a guarantee that you'll have it, but certainly looking at the allergens first. Peanuts for some people can be a big allergen. So that's another thing to consider. High sugar diet, which doesn't mean that all sugar is bad, but a diet that's pretty high in sugar will lead to excess levels of inflammation. Trans fats will lead to excess levels of inflammation. And then to minimize it, those antioxidants, any blue, green, purple, those brightly colored foods, that will help to lower the inflammation in your body.
Does grapeseed oil have good, healthy fats? Additionally, is it equivalent to olive oil?
It does. Yeah. And I would say that that's a good one. Yeah.
Is there a half-life to vitamins and mineral supplements as a
scientific literature that backs that up, other than that particular author's research that he's done? So I think that if you want to, I think it's called Eat Right for Your Type. And he certainly has a whole listing. The challenge with that particular approach is there are a lot of foods that are also banned for your blood type. And if that leads you to say that bananas are banned for you, and so you take out bananas and you start eating a chocolate chip muffin, that's probably not the best balance. But again, you can take a look at that book and see what he has to say.
Are there any injectable or other non-dietary sources of vitamin D if levels stay low with sun exposure and supplements?
There are injectable and pill forms of vitamin D. So yes, absolutely. That's something that's possible. There's also really, really high dose vitamin D in pill form that the doctor will give you if you have very low levels.
What is the best way to determine if you have fatty liver issues?
The doctor will be able to let you know. They'll start by looking and your triglycerides might get off, but then ultrasound is really one of the best ways for the doctor to find it.
Are there specific foods to avoid to manage a flare-up of diverticulosis? I think I got it right.
Yeah, you did. Diverticulitis. You were really close. That anything that inflames your gut. So if you notice that you have reactions to dairy, to gluten, to nightshade vegetables is another one, which would be like eggplant, tomato, things like that. That can help to manage an outbreak. And then also in that case, sometimes people have to lower their fiber intake.
Pros and cons of
that handle saturated fats and cholesterol just fine. Then eggs probably are a good source of protein.
Do you use consumed labs or something else to make sure that what is listed in vitamins is in the pill?
I make sure there's always something called the FDA label. It might say GMP, good manufacturing practices. I make sure that it goes to the FDA and that they're regularly checking the quality. That does make the cost of your vitamin jump up, at least double, if the FDA has to review and verify what's on there. But at least you know that what's on the nutrition label is what's in the vitamin.
Do you have a take on taking daily probiotics?
I do. I think it's great, especially if you're having gut problems. It's something that maybe you're feeling a little bit down, or you've been traveling. Maybe you've had extra stress in your life. I think that the probiotic, there's pretty good evidence that it can be helpful.
This person's on an Octavia diet, high protein diet, eating 5 small meals a day, prepackaged bars, meals, powder shakes, etc. And you eat 1 lean meat and green vegetable. Are you familiar with this diet? And if so, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great weight loss diet. That is, it's been heavily studied clinically and has very high success rates. The other thing that a diet like that does for you is it balances out your hunger so that you're eating a very low calorie diet every day, but you don't feel as if you're starving and you need to keep eating. So yeah, it's had great clinical success, and people have lost a lot of weight with it.
Going back to the good and bad bacteria, what are the best
cultures, and make sure that it's got lots of different bacteria in there. If it's just general, like maybe I've been a little bit stressed or haven't been eating as healthfully as I should be, then I might get a lower dose with 2 or 3 million bacteria. In terms of the brands, there are lots of good brands that are out there that again, look for that good manufacturing practices label to know that it's handled in the right way. But yeah, there are tons of great brands at the store that you can pick up and use based on what your specific needs are. But certainly you'll want to consider a much higher dose if you're battling those frequent UTIs.
And unless somebody else drops a question in the chat, this will be the last question we field. What to avoid for gout, even if you're vegetarian?
Yeah, it's tough, especially when you have one of those gout flare-ups. The vegetarian diet is a really good start because protein is one of the things that can cause a gout flare-up. When you're looking at your vegetarian diets, the higher sources are going to be soybean products and beans in general. Some of the grains, those will be the ones you may want to limit and see how your body responds. And then the other thing would be protein shakes, making sure to avoid those high protein shakes.
Dr. Judd, fantastic information. It's always great having you a part of our webinar series. And this isn't the last one that you're on the hook for. We'll have you back in about a month and a half, 2 months. So thank you so much for being with us and spending an hour of your busy time with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. You're
so welcome. And just a reminder to those in our audience, today's webinar was recorded. A replay will be made available on our website. Be sure to join us for these upcoming webinars. The third part of our series on nutrition, your diet, and you is Thursday, August 25th. Join Dr. Lizzie Davis for To Infant and Beyond, looking at nutrition throughout the life cycle. Then on Thursday, August 30th, Nancy Ball will be with us for estate planning, understanding the basics. She'll share a basic overview of all core estate planning documents and tips on what to consider. The final part of our 4-part series on this topic, meanwhile, is Wednesday, September 14th. We will welcome Dr. Judd back for Brain Food. Join us as she explores more than 30 foods that have brain function benefits. And on Thursday, September 22nd, we'll welcome Dr. Christopher Edmonds and Dr. Mark Edmonds for Blockchain and Web 3.0, a decentralized world. During this webinar, we'll explore Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Check out more on all of these offerings and other webinars at alumni.uab.edu/events. Wind down the summer with us on Sunday, August 14th. We'll be on the campus green for the first ever Legacy Family Day, sponsored by Legacy Credit Union. Get a picture taken with Blaze, enjoy Italian ice and gelato, and take a trip down our water slides. It's only $5 to register. Visit alumni.uab.edu/family day. Looking for something for your commute to or from the office? Check out UAB Green and Told podcast. New episodes debut every other week with conversations with a member of the UAB community. One of them also features Dr. Judd. The podcast can be downloaded on Spotify, the Apple Podcast app, or on our website. And be sure to stay on top of all things alumni. Take a look at our social media. We can be found by searching UAB Alumni on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. On LinkedIn, search Alumni Career Community. Finally, let us know what you thought about today's virtual session. The QR code on your screen directs you to a short survey, and we'd love your feedback. Once again, thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. And as always, go Blazers.